With no end in sight to the social distancing measures being taken around the world, the idea of the current Premier League season returning grows ever more distant as well. Before we begin, the article aspects of this video are based on first appeared on The Athletic and was written by Matt Slater. Head to www.theathletic.com/RabonaTV to get started with a 7-day free trial and 40% off of your annual subscription. Hey there, I'm Adrian, and in this final collaboration with The Athletic for the foreseeable future at least, we'll look to the legal minefield that stands in the way of the Premier League returning, mostly in regards to player contracts. Players, coaches, staff, brand partnerships, most contracts in the world of football are written with June 30th as the end date, though in this particular case, the player contracts are what makes the idea of pushing the season beyond June 30th a massive headache. If the season is to be extended beyond June 30th, clubs are going to want to extend some of their expiring contracts, but they are unlikely to want to hand out new 3-year deals, so they are likely to be short-term deals, says Nick DeMarco, QC, a barrister with Blackstone Chambers. But this presents a perennial problem for players. If you get injured while playing on a short-term contract, you could find yourself without a job. Now, it makes sense for all parties to negotiate and find a way through this, but it is not required for players to agree to these short-term extensions under English law. This provides a very bizarre situation, of course, as some clubs will feel hard done by if crucial players that are out of contract come June 30th refuse to sign. The first to come to mind is Napoli, where both Dries Mertens and Sergio Callahan will be out of contract this summer, both showing the intention of leaving the club, or at least they used to be. Would they really sign a short-term contract to close out the season and potentially get injured? Probably not. If they do, the risk falls completely on them while the club gets away relatively unscathed. If either were to fall injured, that could put their chances at signing with another club in jeopardy. So, what will they do to combat this? There still isn't a clear answer, but FIFA is working on it. As Slater continues, a working group set up by World Football's governing body, FIFA, to look at the regulatory issues posed by the pandemic has recently sent a report to the game's stakeholders. In this report, which The Athletic has seen, FIFA says the 3 core matters that must be addressed are expiring contracts, the appropriate timing for the next transfer window, currently scheduled to open on July 1st, and frustrated agreements that can no longer be fulfilled because of the outbreak. Now, another aspect is how different legal systems across Europe may interpret contracts, the main aspect of this being the contractual intention, as Slater writes. This, in layman terms, is basically how rigid the contract would be. But with the virus potentially pushing things beyond that date, would players be willing to respect that intention? Slater and Nick DeMarco explore that. In England, it is based on what an objective bystander would reasonably consider the intention of the contract to be, explains DeMarco. In this case, the fact the contracts say June 30th, it would be reasonable to assume that that is what was intended. But under civil law, you look more at the subjective interpretation of intention. So, for example, if you had evidence to suggest the parties to the contract actually meant until the end of the season, you could more easily extend it. But on the contrary to that, football contracts, on the other hand, really aren't very sophisticated, and I wonder if this is something we should look at after the crisis. If you're Birmingham City's Jude Bellingham, just to pick one example, are you really going to want to play a few more games in the Championship this summer if you already have a move to Borussia Dortmund or Manchester United lined up? The Athletic spoke with Dan Lowen, who is a sports contract specialist at a London-based firm called Level. As Lowen points out, the situation in England, particularly at several of the Premier League's top clubs, is further complicated by the fact many players' contracts are now heavily skewed towards incentives or bonuses. In normal times, these contingent payments are seen as a win-win because the clubs recognize that they gain if a player meets these targets. He says, if the season is cancelled, players will not receive these bonuses, some of which they could have reasonably expected to have received. In those circumstances, should they also agree to cut or defer their basic salaries? So, should players who are already missing out on performance-based bonuses and incentives from their contracts also take a pay cut from their wage? Of course, they're paid mouth-watering wages, and I personally believe everyone needs to make sacrifices at this time, but I can see how players would be unhappy with the fact that they could be losing on incentives and weekly wages on top of that. So what else does DeMarco have to say, let's say in regards to the likelihood of players agreeing to these short-term contracts? We're talking about the players whose contracts expire on June 30th. I don't think extending the season for months is realistic or possible from a legal point of view. I can't see players agreeing to short-term extensions if they know they're going to be cramming games in before facing a quick turnaround for another long season. The risk of injury will only be increased. And diving further into the risk of injuries increasing, we all know what happens when a player isn't fully fit and they're rushed back onto the pitch. All of these professional footballers are stuck at home training right now, and some are seemingly putting in a great effort to stay in shape for the return of football. But undoubtedly, they won't be anywhere near to the fitness levels required, which will increase the likelihood of an injury. Kevin De Bruyne just recently spoke of this matter when he said, quote, "I have no idea when we will be playing again. You haven't played for 6 weeks. Normally, you'd need a preparation of 3 to 4 weeks. If we restart immediately, then everybody will be injured after a few games." But beyond what would be an injury crisis for most teams, Slater dug up another legal pitfall. He spoke to Daniel Guy, another sports lawyer. What happens if a player is out of contract on July 1st, but cannot be employed or registered by another club until the new season starts because the transfer window has moved? That's a restraint of trade, says Guy. My gut feeling is the clubs will have enough players to finish the season without dishing out lots of short-term deals, although this will clearly lead to some questions about the integrity of the competition. So what's expected to happen from another legal point of view? One lawyer, who remained anonymous, said that he expects the closing of the season to go down like this. The leaders in each league would be awarded the respective titles. The current Premier League table would decide the European places. The top 2 in the Championship, League 1 and League 2, would be promoted, and there would be no relegation. The divisions would then be readjusted over the coming seasons. Somebody will try to sue the leagues, but I think it will be a case of the path of least resistance, and I'm sure a settlement can be reached with the broadcasters, he said. Whatever happens, you can keep up to date on all things football on The Athletic. You'll find coverage of the Serie A, Bundesliga, Premier League, Champions League, MLS, and more. All of it free from advertisements. Plus, The Athletic has an ever-expanding roster of exclusive podcasts hosted by world-renowned journalists, analysts, and experts. The chart-topping Ornstein and Chapman podcast, Zonal Marking, Total Soccer Show, and more look at football at a national level, while there are plenty of team-specific Premier League podcasts as well for that thorough team-by-team coverage. So if you want to support Rabona TV and get access to some of the best journalism available to you online, then head over to www.theathletic.com/RabonaTV to get a free 7-day trial and 40% off of your annual fee. Thanks guys, thanks for watching, and thanks to those that have stuck with me through all of this. I hope you've enjoyed the content, and the content won't stop. My name's Adrian, this is Rabona TV, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.